Gotta wait till it's done. This is a short tutorial on how to search for an element in a list. Lists are great. They're collections of information, and so far we've been really good at putting things into lists. But how do I find something in a list? Because that's really what you're going to spend most of your time doing as a programmer when you're collecting information and then trying to find it to do something with it. So that's what this challenge in Codio talks to. And so what we're going to be doing, what Codio is going to give us, is it's going to pass in two inputs, okay? A list of numbers and a number n that you have to look for. So we get a list of numbers, and then we get something to look for in that list of numbers. So we have to loop through the list. We have to find the number that's given to us as the second input, and then output the list of you want to output the index of the place in the list, and if we can't find it, we output -1. So this is one of those places. Remember last week where we talked about break statements? This is one of those places where we're going to use it. So let's take a look at what Codio is giving us here. Okay, the first thing Codio is giving us is a variable that's capital N. That we know it's an integer because it uses the int function, and we're getting in sysargv. In this case of 2, because it's the second argument that's passed in. And then what we're getting is we're going to be given a list of string. We know that. We saw this in the previous challenge. It's a comma-separated list of strings, but we're told in the program statement that that list of strings are actually integers. So what we need to do is we're going to check it first, and then we're going to populate our list. And then once that list is populated, then we can get started with the challenge. But let's just take a look at what this is actually doing. Okay, here we've created our empty list. Okay, or Codio has. Here we've taken in a list of strings, or sorry, my apologies. Here we're given a string with a comma separated list of information. Okay, and the split is going to change that from just a regular string into a list. But it's a list of strings, and we're not looking for strings, we're looking for integers. So first thing we're doing is, remember we have our helper variable I that's inside the for loop. Now what I want to do is I want to make sure that nobody passed in anything tricky. So this is a new function that we can use on any variable, and it says, is it a digit? Or in this case, is it a number? So that's what this is doing. It's saying, is I a number? And if it is, then we're going to go and we're going to add it to our list of numbers. And if it's not, it's just going to ignore it. So let's go through and see what we have here. So I'm going to put in some print statements that we'll take out later. But first, I'm going to print I. I just want to see what it is. Okay, now I know that the output's going to be wrong, and that's okay. So in this case, I have I is 3, 11, 42, and 12. So they're all integers, so that's great. They're not doing anything tricky. And I now know that I have a list of numbers. So what do I want to do with that list of numbers? So what we need to do here is we need to search. And what we're going to do to search is we're going to use a for loop. Again, I'm using a list, and I usually will employ a for loop for that list. So what I know is I'm going to have a for loop, and I'm going to range. I'm going to use a range, so I'm just going to say I in range. I'm sorry, I in list. well, I could do that, or sorry, I in numbers. But I could do that, but let's think about this for a minute. If we think about this, what we're really looking for here is the element index. So if I just use my shorthand of in numbers, it might not work because I don't know how I'm going to get the index. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the len function here. So I'm going to do range instead of 0 to the length of numbers. And that will give me my elements. So then what do I want to do? Well, right now I'm just going to print I. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to print numbers of, hold on, let's get rid of that. Is, and then I'm going to say numbers of I, because I just want to see what's in here. That's what I'm doing right now. Now the program output will be wrong, and I can't convert int to string. So I'm going to say stir, and I'm going to say stir here. Oops. So let's see what happens when I check it. Now the output's still wrong, and that's completely fine. Whoops, I put 1 instead of I, my apologies. So here I have number of 0 is 1, number of 1 is 3, number of 2 is 11, and so forth. And that's great. But now I need to find something in this list. And what I'm trying to find is n. So n has been passed in here. So let's just comment out this print statement. And instead, I'm going to say if, numbers of I is the same as n, then I'm going to print I, and I'm going to break. And that's fine and good. Except what happens if I don't find it? Well, let's check it. So what I've done here is it's incorrect because the expected output is -1, and it's expected that if n is not found, we output -1. So having this print statement here really isn't doing me a lot of good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use a utility variable called found. And found is going to equal -1. And instead of printing here, if I find it, I'm going to say found is equal to I. And at the very end, I'm going to print I. So let's see what happens when I do that. That still said it was wrong. It expected. All right. So if number of found equal I, break. So why did I get the output of 4? So found is I for I in numbers. Let's see what I did wrong here. If numbers of I is n, found is I. Oh, I printed the wrong thing. I needed to print found. My bad. This is what happens when you have a problem with the keyboard in the chair and you're not paying attention as much as you should to your code. So here it's correct when I print out the right thing. So let's examine a few things here. I used a helper variable, but instead of having that helper variable just be equal to 0, this time I set it equal to -1. And I set it equal to -1 because that's ultimately what the last possible condition is. So I'm just going to say if found is going to be -1. We're just going to assume that n's not going to be there. And then if n is there, we'll change what found is. So what I did is I have my 4 and I did a range from 0 to len of numbers because I wanted to get the element number. I wanted to get the index number. I didn't want to get the actual element stored in the list. So this syntax will give me the index number. And then I have an if statement inside my for loop. We did this last week. It's completely acceptable. It works really well when you're searching for numbers, for information in a list. So my condition is if the element of numbers at index I is the same as n, then I'm just going to change found to I. And then I'm going to break. Well, why am I breaking here? Well, if I found it, I don't need to keep going. So I'm not going to keep going. I'm going to break out of the loop, which will send me right to line 23, and I will print it out. Now, let's look at a couple of things that might cause syntax errors or runtime errors in this script. First of all, len of numbers is a function, and we'll talk more about functions in 2 weeks. But for right now, when we use a function, we have to start with an open parentheses, and we have to close with a closed parentheses. And if I don't do that, I'm going to get a syntax error. So let's see what happens when I just have len space numbers. I get a syntax error. Now the nice thing about this syntax error is that it is telling me the correct line. And it's saying I have an invalid syntax. There's something wrong here. Well, what's wrong is that I took out this open parentheses. So if I go and I fix that, everything's right. Now, what happens if I use a single equal sign instead of a double equal sign? Well, I'm going to get a syntax error again, and it tells me the correct line. That's line 19, and it's because I cannot ever use a single equal sign in an if statement. It always has to be double equal. And if I do that, then I'm okay. And so those are just a couple of errors that you could run into when you're doing the for loop. The other kind of error you could run into is to forget to indent. If I forget to indent the if statement, I'm going to get something that says there's an error in the program. There's an indentation error, line 19. It says line 19 needs to be indented. It needs to be indented because it's the first active line of code, which is a non-comment, after the for loop. So I need to indent it. The same thing here. I'll get an indentation error on line 20 if I forget to indent it. Now, if I only indent it 1, I'm going to have the same indentation error. And that's because of this if statement. The if is indented 1 to the right. So anything underneath the if statement has to be indented 2 to the right. So it's indented 1 for the if and a second time, indented 1 for the for and a second time for the if. And there's one other issue that could cause me to have problems. This break statement could be in the wrong spot, okay? I didn't get a syntax error, but my output is incorrect. And my output is incorrect because it's expected 3, it got -1. I never stopped, okay? So it was looking for 42. It should have found 42. But I never broke, so it just kept going. And it shouldn't have just kept going. It should have stopped at the right place. So when I tell it to stop at the right place, lo and behold, I get the right output. So you have to make sure your break is in the right place, because putting a break out, one indent out, won't, and thus putting it outside the if block, will make your program not run right, but it won't give you a syntax error. So this has been a short tutorial on how to search a list.